I was half listening to the radio while folding the evening's laundry when I caught the subtle discord in our home. A note, a misplaced rhythm in the quiet. I just finished throwing on a faded sweater when Sherry's soft laughter spilled out from the living room, too light and distant to be our usual duet. It wasn't the sound of an ordinary chuckle. It was laced with a secret that I couldn't quite decipher. I paused, heart beginning its slow, heavy beat, and crept toward the sound. In the doorway, I saw Sherry seated on our worn leather sofa, her gaze fixated on a small device in her hand. The glow from the screen painted her face in hues of blue and amber, highlighting an expression that wasn't mine to recognize, a spark of excitement, perhaps even mischief. For a split second, the familiar contours of her features blurred into something foreign, as if I were looking at a stranger who had borrowed my wife's skin. I remember the slight tremor in my breath, an inexplicable sense of dread mingling with the ordinary calm of a quiet evening. "Sherry!" I ventured softly, my voice echoing in the charged silence of the room. Her eyes darted up, startled, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air between us grew thick with unspoken questions. "Lane," she murmured, her tone careful, almost rehearsed, as if she were treading a well-known but forbidden path. I could almost see the gears turning behind her eyes, the quick calculation of how to deflect my concern. I stepped closer, trying to decipher the coded messages in her expression. Her hands, which moments earlier had been idly tapping on her phone, now clutched it tightly, as if protecting some clandestine treasure. The room's quiet was suddenly shattered by the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of a car passing by, each mundane noise amplifying the storm inside me. I couldn't shake the feeling that every second of silence was loaded with revelations waiting to emerge. As I took a seat beside her, the tension in the space was palpable, a fragile line between what was and what might be. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, the words tumbling out in a rush that betrayed my attempt to remain calm. Her eyes flickered with a momentary glimmer of panic before they settled into a mask of nonchalance. "Just a friend," she replied, her tone light, as though the matter were trivial, an everyday anecdote rather than a prelude to betrayal. But I wasn't so sure. The cadence of her reply, the slight pause before it, and the way her fingers fumbled to hide the phone from my view all whispered a tale of secrecy. I reached out, my hand hovering uncertainly near hers, as if to bridge the growing chasm between us, yet held back by an invisible, icy barrier of distrust. In that charged moment, every detail, the soft murmur of her voice, the crisp rustle of the fabric beneath my fingers, the muted glimmer of the device, became a clue in a puzzle I was desperate to solve. The ordinary intimacy of our shared space had been hijacked by an uninvited suspicion, transforming our home into a stage for a drama I hadn't auditioned for. Before I could press further, a knock at the door interrupted our silent standoff, a knock so deliberate it seemed to announce the arrival of fate itself. My pulse quickened as I rose, leaving Sherry with that guarded look, one that now seemed layered with secrets and half-truths. With a knock echoing in my ears, I hesitated only a moment before making my way toward the door, each step heavy with the foreboding knowledge that nothing in our life would ever be the same again. The knock at the door echoed in my mind as I walked back into the living room, the heavy thud of my heartbeat drowning out all other sounds. Sherry's eyes met mine with a flicker of uncertainty, and before I could settle my swirling thoughts, she spoke. "Lane, what's going on?" Her voice, though soft, carried an edge that betrayed her calm facade. I closed the door behind me and moved to the center of the room, the tension mounting with each measured step. "I need to know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who were you really talking to earlier?" I pressed, the words tumbling out faster than I intended. Her eyes darted away, and I could see the brief shadow of guilt pass over her features. "Lane, it's nothing," she replied too quickly, her tone tight. "Just a friend from a book club." But the clatter of my racing heart told me that nothing about this felt ordinary. As I watched her, a sense of urgency grew, a need to see the truth behind the veil of half-truths and evasions. I needed something more concrete, something undeniable. Later that evening, while Sherry was in the other room, I found myself drawn to her phone again. I hesitated, wrestling with the morality of invading her privacy, but the gnawing doubt was too powerful to ignore. With trembling hands, I picked it up and scrolled through the messages. What I found wasn't overtly explicit at first glance, a series of seemingly mundane texts. But there were details, small and deliberate. An address repeated over the past few weeks, late-night exchanges filled with playful banter and coded language, and a photo attachment showing a car parked outside an unfamiliar cafe at odd hours. Every message was like a tiny piece of shattered glass reflecting a truth I had been too afraid to see. My heart pounded as I pieced together the narrative hidden within these digital confessions. The texts were laced with subtle invitations and hurried apologies that hinted at clandestine rendezvous. One message in particular caught my eye, a string of words that read, "Meet me at the Bluebird, tonight. I can't wait to see you again." It was signed simply with her first name, Sherry. It struck me like a lightning bolt. This wasn't a slip of the tongue but a deliberate betrayal. I confronted Sherry the next morning, the air between us thick with the residue of a night spent in anxious silence. "Sherry, I went through your phone," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet laced with a resolve that couldn't be undone. The shock in her eyes was palpable, a mix of horror and resignation. "How long?" I demanded, my tone rising with each syllable. "How long have you been lying to me?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she sank into the kitchen chair. "It started a few months ago," she confessed in a shaky tone, her hands nervously fidgeting with the edge of the tablecloth. "I didn't mean for it to hurt you, Lane. I felt lost." Her admission hung in the air, heavy and painful. I struggled to keep my own emotions in check, feeling the weight of betrayal seep into every corner of my being. I couldn't help but interject. "A few months? And all those moments you said you were with me, that you were here." My voice cracked as I tried to piece together the fragments of our shared life with the stark reality before me. "I don't understand, Sherry. Was I not enough?" The question was more for myself than for her, a desperate plea for clarity amid the storm of confusion and hurt. Sherry's silence was deafening, her eyes brimming with regret. "It wasn't about you, Lane," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I was searching for something, and I got lost along the way." The admission, though soft, was like a slap to my senses. I felt the concrete evidence of her infidelity, the texts, the photo, the coded messages, solidify in my mind, each piece a testament to the betrayal I had long feared but never truly expected. As our conversation spiraled into a painful mix of accusations and tearful apologies, I sensed a shift inside me. The raw agony of betrayal mingled with a grim acceptance of the truth. I knew that nothing would ever be the same. In that charged silence, as Sherry's whispered confessions filled the room, I made a decision. I would confront this betrayal head-on, no longer a passive victim to my doubts. I needed answers, and more than that, I needed to reclaim my own truth. Before the conversation could fully unravel, the phone rang, a shrill, insistent sound that cut through the tension like a knife. I looked at Sherry, whose eyes mirrored my own turmoil, and realized that this unexpected call might just be the next twist in a story that was far from over. The ring seemed to promise more revelations, and as I reached for the phone, a deep, disquieting thought settled in my mind. I was now on a path from which there was no turning back. The moment the phone call ended, a cold resolve swept over me, and I knew that any further delay was a betrayal of my own truth. I couldn't stand in that limbo any longer. I turned sharply to Sherry, my eyes burning with a mix of hurt and anger. "We need to talk now," I declared, my voice trembling with a controlled fury that left no room for her evasions. Sherry's face drained of color. She fumbled with her words, as if trying to grasp a thread of composure that was rapidly slipping away. "Lane, please. I can explain," she stuttered, glancing away as if the truth were a monster hiding in the shadows of our living room. I took a step forward, my pulse pounding in my ears, every beat echoing the betrayal I had uncovered. "Explain what, Sherry?" "That you've been lying to me for months," I demanded, my tone sharp enough to cut through the thick tension that had settled between us. I could see the panic in her eyes, a silent admission of guilt and confusion. The air crackled with the electric charge of confrontation, each moment a battleground of raw emotions. "You're overreacting," she began weakly, her voice quivering as she tried to meet my gaze. But I wasn't having it. I grabbed the phone from the table, scrolling through the damning messages with deliberate slowness, as if to emphasize the magnitude of her betrayal. These texts, these late-night meetings, they're not just overreactions, Sherry. They're evidence. Evidence of a life you've been living behind my back, I said, my words laced with bitterness and disbelief. Her eyes widened, and for a long, agonizing minute, she remained silent. Then, with a barely audible sigh, she tried to deflect. "They were just meaningless exchanges, Lane. You know how people talk. They flirt without meaning," she lied, her tone pleading as if the excuse could somehow erase the scars of deception. I felt my throat tighten, the sting of her lie fueling a crescendo of anguish and outrage. "Meaningless? You call this meaningless?" I saw the photos, the addresses, the subtle hints of rendezvous. How could you trivialize what is clearly a deep betrayal? I demanded, my voice breaking as I struggled to contain the tidal wave of emotions crashing inside me. Sherry's facade began to crumble. I didn't think it would hurt you this much," she murmured, her eyes filling with tears as the weight of her actions finally bore down on her. I was confused, lost. "I didn't want to hurt you, Lane." Her words, however, did little to stem the storm raging within me. I felt every lie as a blow to my heart, every excuse as a nail sealing the coffin of our shared past. "You were confused?" I scoffed bitterly, taking a step so close that I could see the fear etched on her face. "I trusted you with my heart, Sherry. Every day, every night, I believed in us. And now, you tell me you were lost? What about the promises, the moments we shared?" The questions spilled out of me, a barrage of sorrow and betrayal that demanded answers. Sherry's breath came in short, uneven bursts as she tried to compose herself. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her guilt. "I thought I could control it, that it would end before it hurt you. I never meant for you to find out like this." The desperation in her voice was palpable, a raw admission of a secret life that had spiraled out of control. For a moment, I stood frozen, grappling with a painful reality that everything I believed in was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. The room, once a sanctuary of our shared dreams, now felt suffocating, every piece of furniture a silent witness to the unraveling of our marriage. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the stranger who had betrayed me so thoroughly. In that charged silence, my resolve hardened. I could no longer live in a space where trust was a relic of the past. I turned away from Sherry, feeling the tears of both anger and heartbreak streaming down my face. "I can't do this anymore," I declared, my voice firm yet laden with sorrow. "I can't be with someone who hides behind lies, who chooses secrets over honesty." Without waiting for her to speak or beg, I moved to the hallway. Each step felt like a final farewell to a life that had once been full of promise but was now stained with deceit. I opened the closet and began to pack a few essential items. My shirt, a pair of shoes, the photograph of us from happier times, each item a painful reminder of the love that had once defined us. The act of packing became a symbolic severance, a necessary step towards reclaiming the dignity I had lost. Sherry called out softly, "Lane, please don't go, let's talk, please." Her voice echoed in the empty corridor, but the distance between us was insurmountable. I paused for a split second, torn between the remnants of love and the stark reality of betrayal. But the deep, aching hurt in my chest left me no choice. I wasn't sure if talking could ever heal the wounds inflicted by months of deceit. I slung my bag over my shoulder and took one last lingering look back at the living room. Sherry sat there, her eyes red and pleading, a mixture of regret and desperation that pierced through me. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words lost in the silence that followed. But apologies, no matter how sincere, could never undo what had been done. With a heavy heart and a mind numb from the onslaught of emotions, I stepped out the door into the cool night, leaving behind the fragments of a broken marriage. As the door clicked shut behind me, I realized that I was not just leaving a house, but the painful memories and the betrayal that had shattered my trust. I walked away, each step echoing the resolve that this scandal was not just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a journey towards a truth that I desperately needed to reclaim. The night swallowed my retreating figure, and as I disappeared into the darkness, I couldn't help but wonder. Was this the end of our story, or merely the prelude to something even more devastating? The cool night air hit me like a barrage of bitter truth as I trudged along the deserted sidewalk. Every step felt weighted with the echoes of a life that had crumbled behind me. I was still reeling from the explosive confrontation, every detail of Sherry's broken confessions replaying in my mind like a relentless, looping nightmare. Shock had turned into an unyielding numbness that clung to me with every breath. I found myself wandering aimlessly, the streetlights painting long, uncertain shadows on the pavement. I couldn't shake the overwhelming sensation of betrayal, the raw, excruciating shock of realizing that the woman I had devoted my life to had been leading a double existence. The bitterness of her lies, the cold evidence of texts and photos, still burned behind my eyes. I was left with a gaping emptiness, as if my very soul had been hollowed out by the weight of her treachery. I stopped at the edge of a small park, a place where I used to find solace during times of uncertainty. Sitting on a cold, empty bench, I tried to gather the shattered fragments of my memories. The park, once a sanctuary of laughter and shared dreams, now felt eerily desolate. I recalled the countless evenings we spent here, our hands intertwined as we planned for a future that now seemed like a distant fantasy. The contrast between the past and the present was jarring, a cruel reminder of everything that had been lost. Why did it have to end this way? I muttered under my breath, the question echoing in the silent night. Anger surged inside me, mingling with profound sadness. I was angry at Sherry for her betrayal, yet I was equally enraged with myself for not noticing the subtle signs sooner. Self-doubt gnawed at me relentlessly. Had I been too trusting? Was I too blind to see the cracks forming in our marriage? The questions were endless, each one a sharp stab in a heart already battered by pain. As the minutes turned into hours, the initial shock began to give way to a quieter, more insidious form of sorrow. I replayed the confrontation in my mind, the sharp tone in my voice, the desperate look in her eyes, and my own silent, seething resolve as I packed my few belongings. I remembered Sherry's whispered apologies, the futile pleas that fell on ears too broken to listen. In that moment, I had made a decision that felt irrevocable. To walk away, to seek refuge from a betrayal so deep that reconciliation seemed impossible. Yet amidst the torrent of raw emotions, a strange clarity began to emerge. I realized that the hurt was not just an end, but also the beginning of something painfully real, a chance to rebuild from the wreckage of our shattered past. It was a slow, agonizing acknowledgement that while the love we once shared was irrevocably tainted, I could still find a way to move forward. In that quiet solitude, I allowed myself to feel every emotion, the anger, the sorrow, the bitterness, but also a tentative spark of understanding. I was not weak for breaking down. I was human. The gentle hum of distant traffic and the rustling of leaves in the cold breeze became a subtle lullaby to my wounded soul. I began to scribble down my thoughts in a small, worn notebook, a habit I had once abandoned, now resurrected as a lifeline to hold on to who I was. With each word, I tried to stitch together a narrative that made sense of the chaos, a story where I could reclaim my identity from the ruins of our marriage. But as the night deepened, so did my anxiety. I realized that while I might find temporary solace in these moments of introspection, the emotional scars would not vanish overnight. They were etched into my heart, a permanent reminder of love lost and trust shattered. I wondered if the future held the promise of healing, or if I was destined to walk a lonely path, burdened by memories too heavy to shed. In the stillness of that desolate park, a final thought struck me with both clarity and dread. Sometimes, the hardest battles are fought not in the glare of confrontation but in the silent, persistent struggle within our own minds. As I closed my notebook and looked up at the starless sky, I felt an unsettling mix of resignation and fragile hope. The journey ahead was uncertain, fraught with the peril of unresolved pain and relentless self-doubt. I stood, brushing off the cold dust from my jeans, and took a deep, shuddering breath. The shock of betrayal had not only ended my marriage but had also unmoored me from the certainty I once clung to. With each step away from the park, I carried the weight of the night's revelations, a weight that promised to linger long into the future. The road ahead was dark and uncharted, and as I disappeared into the night, I couldn't help but feel that the scars of tonight would mark me, a silent testament to a love lost and a future forever changed. The morning I woke up, the chill of yesterday's betrayal still lingered, but something inside me had shifted irrevocably. I stared out the window at the pale light breaking over the horizon, feeling both the raw sting of loss and the quiet promise of a new beginning. The decision was made. I was filing for divorce. There was no turning back now. That realization struck me like a bolt of lightning, igniting a fierce determination to reclaim my identity. I spent the first part of the day drafting the necessary paperwork. With every word I typed, I could almost feel the weight of my past lifting off my shoulders. The sterile hum of my old laptop was punctuated by my steady, resolute keystrokes as I poured out the finality of my decision. "This is it," I muttered to myself, the sentence echoing in the quiet room that once was a haven of shared dreams. As I closed my laptop, a knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Darren, an old friend from college, standing there with a concerned look. Darren's eyes, sharp and sincere, immediately conveyed that he'd sensed something was off. "Lane, I got your message. How are you holding up?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck as memories of the past few weeks surged back. "I'm trying, Darren. It's been a brutal wake-up call. I filed for divorce yesterday," I admitted, the words feeling both freeing and heartbreaking as they left my lips. Darren's brow furrowed in sympathy, and he placed a firm, supportive hand on my shoulder. "I'm sorry, man. That's a lot to process. But I know you're stronger than this," he said, his voice a blend of encouragement and genuine concern. We settled into the living room, a space now cluttered with remnants of a shared life that no longer belonged to me. Darren's presence was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this struggle. "Tell me what you plan to do next," he urged gently, prodding me to envision a future beyond the devastation. I hesitated, the enormity of the task ahead weighing on me. "Honestly, I don't have it all figured out yet. But I've started by cleaning up the place." I tore down the wall in the study. Turns out, it was more symbolic of the barriers I'd built around myself than a structural necessity. I confessed, a slight wryness seeping into my tone as I recalled the laborious demolition of not just a wall, but of old habits and defenses. Darren chuckled, a warm sound that cut through the somber mood. "That's the spirit, Lane. Sometimes you have to tear things down to rebuild them stronger." His words resonated deeply. We spent the next few hours talking about the pain of betrayal, about the necessity of loss in order to truly understand oneself, and about the paths that lay ahead. Darren, ever the pragmatist, reminded me of the hobbies I'd abandoned. "Remember how you used to love woodworking? You built that coffee table from scratch. Maybe it's time to pick that up again." The suggestion struck a chord. In the weeks of turmoil, I'd forgotten the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands, of watching raw material transform into a functional piece of art. That very afternoon, I dug out my old tool chest from the garage. The familiar feel of worn wood and cold metal under my fingers sparked memories of simpler times, moments when life was defined by tangible progress rather than emotional turmoil. In the days that followed, my routine began to shift. I found solace in reconnecting with old friends, attending weekend gatherings, and even joining a local woodworking class where I met people who shared my passion for craftsmanship. Each interaction, every stroke of sandpaper against wood, slowly began to fill the void that Sherry's betrayal had left behind. Late one evening, while I was working on a new piece, a small, intricately carved chair, I paused and realized that the act of creation was more than just a distraction. It was a form of therapy. I had transformed my grief into something tangible, something that could one day be admired for its beauty and resilience. The soft whir of the power tools mingled with the rhythmic tapping of my chisel, each sound a beat in the steady march toward recovery. Darren stopped by that night to check on my progress. "You look different, Lane. Lighter, somehow. What changed?" he asked as he watched me smooth the final edges of my creation. I set down my tools and leaned back, wiping a bead of sweat from my brow. "I'm beginning to see that the end of my marriage isn't just a painful loss. It's also a chance to rediscover who I am. I'm tired of living in the shadow of betrayal. I want to build something new, both here in this house and inside me," I replied, my voice steady despite the remnants of sorrow. Darren smiled, a genuine, reassuring smile that lit up his face. "That's what I like to hear. Life is full of endings and beginnings, Lane. And sometimes, the most unexpected endings pave the way for the most extraordinary new chapters." As the weeks turned into months, the house slowly transformed alongside me. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and even installed a small workshop in the corner of the living room. Each change a deliberate step toward reclaiming my space and, more importantly, my identity. I began attending support groups, where I shared my story and listened to others navigate similar storms. The shared vulnerability of these meetings, the collective understanding of loss and hope, began to stitch the emotional scars into lessons rather than permanent wounds. One crisp autumn evening, as I sat on the newly installed porch swing, a sense of calm washed over me. I sipped a cup of strong coffee and watched the leaves fall, a quiet metaphor for the old brittle parts of my life finally letting go. I felt an epiphany crystallize within me. The pain of betrayal would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined my future. I was not the victim of my past. I was the architect of my new life. In that moment of serene clarity, I dialed Darren's number. "Thanks for being there, man," I said, the gratitude in my voice unmistakable. "I'm ready to move on. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Darren's voice crackled warmly over the line. "I knew you'd find your way, Lane. Keep building, keep believing. You're not alone, and you've got a whole future waiting for you." As the call ended, I felt a surge of hope and determination. The road ahead was still uncertain, the emotional scars deep and persistent, but now I was armed with the realization that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning. I had chosen to file for divorce not out of anger alone, but as an act of self-preservation and rebirth, a chance to rediscover the person I was meant to be. With the stars beginning to twinkle in the night sky, I took one last look at the workshop, the space where I'd rebuilt not just furniture, but fragments of a broken heart. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving wounds that would take time to heal, but it also had stripped away the illusions that kept me from seeing my true worth. The pain was still there, but now it served as a reminder of my strength and resilience. I leaned back on the swing, a soft smile playing on my lips as I whispered to the night, "This is my new beginning,